had to go about it right.
This is the final word story time. Adam Collins with you, Geoff Lemon with me as we do it all again for another week. We gallop through the history of our great game. We have a lot to share with you this week. Before we go there, though, I'll just remind anyone who is just dropping into story time but not necessarily listening to the weekly show that we had a beautiful conversation with Ellie Oldroyd a couple of days ago, which is already there in the feed. And given Ellie loves story time, it's her preferred way of consuming the final word. It'd be a nice thing to, after taking this in, maybe going back in the feed and listening to her, and she'll tell you all about why this is such a fun part of her weekend.
Hello, Adam. We like hanging out with Ellie Oldroyd. So that's pretty much what the show was, just hanging out with Ellie Oldroyd. I quite enjoyed that, the IPL had just been cancelled and we were like, yeah, whatever, we'll mention it. But, let's get on with what we actually want to do. Everyone else was talking about it. There's no point having more people talking about the thing that everyone else is already talking about, as opposed to what we do on Storytime, which is definitely us talking about things that nobody else is talking about. That's pretty much the reason for the existence of this show.
Yeah, I'd imagine that people tuning in today might think, they might just do a bit off the top about Stuart McGill and what happened with the breaking news with him on Wednesday, and given we didn't get a chance to address that on the weekly show, given that it sort of happened the next night. But no, that's not the place for this. That's not the place for talking about the IPL either. That all happens later. Here we talk about the history of our game and we bust some myths along the way.
I will say I hope that Stuart McGill's okay, because bloody hell, having it happen is one thing, but then having the story break and suddenly everybody's talking about an awful traumatic thing that happened to you would be like reliving it all over again. So, he's been a guest on the show and someone we loved having with us, and someone who we valued a lot in that interview. So, sending our best to SCG McGill and hope that he's getting through it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Yeah, it feels a bit glib to move straight on to the next part of the show, but that's what we'll do. We'll have to power on. We like to bust some myths on the final word, and one of those came up via Abhilash Singh's number of 258. Now, I thought we would start here this week before going through the usual pattern, because this has had more bits to it than we necessarily thought.
That's right. So 258 was the cap number of Ishant Sharma. And Abhilash Singh wanted us to link this to the fact that Ishant Sharma had supposedly dropped catches from three players who then went on to make enormous scores. Michael Clarke's 100, Brendan McCullum's 100, and Alasdair Cook's 294. The thing that we've turned up was that it seems very unlikely that it actually happened in the Alasdair Cook innings. So it did happen in the other two, but pinging Ishant Sharma with three of those misses seemed unfair. And I did ask if any listeners could check this out. Mel Shawley, one of our listeners, has been doing the research during the week and has reported back to say that while Cook was probably not dropped during the 294, he was dropped by Ishant Sharma during an innings of 190 in Kolkata in 2012. And it was Ishant Sharma. It was a caught and bowled chance, which the other two were as well. So they were all off Ishant's own bowling, and which was the other thing that tied them together. So that makes it seem like that's the drop that people are thinking of, and Cook did go on to a big score. The thing is that he didn't add that many runs after the drop because he was on 156 when dropped. So, ideally you don't want a player to make 34 more runs because that can be another substantial partnership and all the rest of it. But it wasn't like, he got dropped on 10 and made 300. So with this having happened in another innings, maybe people have portmanteaued the two Cook innings and put the drop in the wrong one.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. The sort of thing where over time it's a better story and thus only appropriate. That's how it ended up on our show, and now we've arrived where it probably really was. But nevertheless, thanks to Abhilash Singh for sending us down that path over the last few weeks. It's been a lot of fun. So an early confirmation there that we did have 258 right, Ishant Sharma's cap number. Geoff, something else that we did last week, we talked to Sam Ashworth off the top about his cap project, and we said we had another similarly themed nerdy nugget to throw in early this week, and that's what we might do here. I had a chat with Rob Kingston this morning, who has been diligently working on some spreadsheets through the last lockdown, and here is his story. Now, Rob, you dropped into our DMs a couple of weeks ago and explain that you've been inspired somewhat through the second or maybe the third lockdown. I forget what lockdown we were up to in February. And you have undertaken a mighty task, which is thoroughly befitting of celebration on Storytime. Rob, hello.
Hi.
Thanks for being with us today. Can you just try and explain what it is you were up to in February and March this year? And we'll drill down a bit as we go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, I'd like to start off by saying you call it a mighty task. I was listening to last week's show when you were talking to Sam, and then you kind of gave me the big teaser ahead of this week's show, and I almost got cold feet because, I mean, his thing was genuinely mighty and actually had some utility. Comparatively, my thing seems kind of tawdry and pointless, but basically it was inspired by a tweet in February time when I was just sitting at home working on my master's during a kind of particularly turgid phase of an essay that I just didn't really enjoy. And I think it was a test match special Twitter, challenged its followers to come up with an 11 whose batting order was also alphabetical. And some guy in the responses had put together an 11 where Zahir Abbas was the opener and Mohammad Azharuddin was number 11. And I thought, that's pretty fun. It's all A's. And I mean, I should have taken that guy's name down and given him some credit because he walked so this stupid thing could run. But basically, I on the day, I was like, let's see if I can come up with an 11 for B, because the A11 actually looked pretty amazing when he rearranged it to be a sensible batting order. I mean, it had like Curtly Ambrose, James Anderson, Wasim Akram, and that's, pretty tasty stuff. I thought there's no way any other letters could put together a team of that quality. And then the B's turned out to be, equally as strong. And I kept going through the alphabet until, 2.5 hours of what should have been quite valuable study time later. I had this whole spreadsheet of 24 teams. I didn't manage to get an X team together. And I merged the Qs and the Zs because of lack of viable options. And at the end of that, that should have been enough for any kind of cricket obsessive. But I thought, rather than go back to real life, I want to see what I can do with this. And I opened up Cricket Captain 2019, and they have this custom match engine where you can choose from like 7,000 different players, including all 3,000 on whatever test cricketers of all time. And so I took 2 random, so I think it was the A's and the B's I did the kind of pilot match with, and I set the game up and I simulated it. I didn't take the reins because I think the team that had me as captain would have been at a serious disadvantage if I'd done that. And the scorecards came out, and I kind of pored over it, and I thought, wow, this is bizarrely kind of compelling. So, and a thought hit me. I thought, well, if I keep going with this, I don't really have to think about the kind of boring and difficult thing I was doing beforehand. So I put it together into a kind of tournament where I, quote unquote, seeded the teams into 3 groups of 8, although looking back on it, there seems to be no rhyme or reason to the seeds, and some groups are way tougher than others. And I thought, right, I'll have them play a round robin and then go through to quarterfinals, like a bit like last season's Bob Willis. And I did the first game, and I set up a spreadsheet to put the stats in and take it. I took my cue from the kind of season averages that you see in Wisden. So I had it's in that format of listings, and I put the stats in from the first game, and I thought, wow, I could have quite a pointless but interesting document here if I stick with this. Then by the end of about the 5th game, I thought, oh, this is going to eat up more of my time than I'd anticipated, because rather than kind of scale back on the extent of the statistical record, I thought, no, I've started this way, so I'm gonna record fastidiously every stat.
That's again, it's the can't stop, won't stop attitude that we take.
Oh my, yeah, totally.
Which, I mean, and I love the idea that you run the test balloon, A's versus B's or whatever it is, and you're like, fuck it, I'm going to run every single game and take down the stats from every. I mean, give us a sense of the amount of time this took, because if you're inputting the data by hand on each game. Yeah. I've seen some of these spreadsheets in their final form. They're quite intricate. I mean, this must have taken ages. Yeah,
it did. And I mean, I'm sure some people may get in touch and tell me that how I could have done this better, but I'm completely tech illiterate. So yeah, I just took a screenshot of the scorecards and literally kind of manually input every number into an Excel spreadsheet. And each game, I'd say, probably took between 5 and 10 minutes to set up the teams on Cricket Captain anyway, because I'm sure there's a way you can, but I don't know how to save custom 11s for future use. So I had to start fresh every time. So it took 5-10 minutes to do that. Simming the game was, was done in an instant. And then probably per game, like half an hour, 40 minutes maybe to do the whole thing. And there were, 7, I think I worked out that the entire thing, start to finish, I think the final was the 63rd game of this.
Longer than the actual World Cup, comfortably.
Yeah.
And what did you find in terms of who were the teams that say made the semi-finals?
The W's were beaten by B's in the first semi. Well, actually, no, that was a draw. And for some reason, I decided that the tiebreaker should be the first innings, which, as a Somerset fan, brought back painful memories of Bob Willis. But the B's were just kind of grimly, predictably amazing because, Bradman, whose giant shadow just kind of just blotted out everything as usual. He was leading run scorer by a massive margin. But the Bees, as Geoff said in his response to my first email, the Bees are a team of shithouses, and they're the people you'd root against. Boycott, Boone, Bradman, Barrington, Border, Botham, Boucher, Benno, Broad, Trent Bolt, and then Bisham Bedi. And I thought, Stuart Broad is kind of the shrinking violet of that team, which says something. But then, the other semi, S beat H by 97 runs. I was hoping there might be a few more upsets, really. Those letters, God, this probably sounds completely absurd to people who aren't looking at this document. Those letters were by and large the stronger sides. Like the H's have a beautifully kind of, black and white sort of legendary 11. Matthew Hayden opens up with Jack Hobbs, Len Hutton, Wally Hammond and George Headley, which I think is quite a beautiful top 5.
I wish he had found room in the H's for Ian Buckles and Dot Cotton. That line might be a bit to those who are listening in Australia, but anyway.
It was, there is entertainment to be had by kind of trying to compile amazing 11s out of, I don't know what you call like the jock letters, like B and A, where they just come up with amazing teams. But the true joy I found was compiling the kind of lesser 11s out of letters that you really had. The letters basically that I had to refer to Stats Guru to find enough players whose names began with this. The first of those was E, which has a reasonable, if kind of quirky batting lineup. John Edridge, Dean Elgar, Bill Edridge, Dean Edgar, Farrokh Engineer, and Mark Elam at 6. But the bowling attack is a thing of kind of insane beauty. You got John Embry and Phil Edmonds as twin spinners, and I gave Embry the captain's armband, which I don't know, and I think Edmonds might bristle at that. But then the seam attack of Fidel Edwards, Shaminda Iranga, and Mark Elam, which would.
We talk about our dream dinner parties. Mark Elam's got to be in some on that front. He's your number 6 and your third seamer. He's doing a lot of heavy lifting there in the.
Yeah, well, you say third seamer. I looked at Shaminda Iranga, who is not a guy whose oeuvre I was familiar with, but his numbers are seriously kind of Sri Lankan seamer who isn't Shaminda Vaz. I think he took like 80 wickets at 39 or something. But yeah, and then the vowels, apart from A, the vowels were pretty tricky to put together. The I's, for example, have a great top 4 of Tamim Iqbal, Nafis Iqbal, Asif Iqbal, and Faisal Iqbal. And then Aikin, the guy Aikin, whose first name I forget, and then Doug Insole at 6, Ray Illingworth, captain 7. And the wicketkeeper, again, wicketkeepers are a tricky one because, they are in many cases the real dark horse of the team. An Indian guy who, and I apologise in advance for this pronunciation, Indrajit Singh, who I think played a few test matches in the 50s. He's at 7. Then Mark Eilert, Alan Iggleston, and Bert Ironmonger finishing that one off. And I'm not sure they did too well. I'm just looking at the thing and sort of making remarks as I see them now. But the team that really disappointed were the R's, who had possibly the strongest top 6 in the thing. Mark Richardson opened up, then Barry Richards, Viv Richards, Richie Richardson, Ajinkya Rahane, Joe Root, and then Dinesh Ramdin. The bowling attack of Andy Roberts, Kemar Roach, Kagiso Rabada, and Sonny Ramadin. Right, you'd think they'd go deep, right? I think they won one game in the whole thing. And that was against one of the real dog shit sides who did absolutely.
They beat the Qs and Zs, something like that.
No, they beat the Jays, actually, surprisingly, who are actually, kind of handy. They lost to the U's, who were again, the U's were kind of a surprise package because they, I really had to dig deep to find enough people with U as a surname. And I also had to treat the kind of, I don't know what you call it, the sort of prefix subname in Inzamam ul Haq and Misbah ul Haq as the first letter of their surname, just so they had a batting order. But there's Kasim Umar, Tawfiq Umar, George Uliet, Polly Umrigar, Inzi, Misbah, and a guy called Atiq Uz-Zaman, who played one test as a Pakistani wicketkeeper, and who basically saved the U's from liquidation because I had this rule where I thought they better all be test cricketers, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to find them on the Cricket Captain database. But yeah, I mean, another thing I realized as I was going through it, I became more interested in imagining how these teams would get on off the field than on it, because I mean, some of the groups of guys are pretty eclectic. And I thought, for example, I mean, imagine how David Gower, W.G. Grace and Graham Gooch would get on behind, in the bubble, for example.
Rob, this is proof that the vagaries of cricket extend from on-field to off, and the passion of people that listen to our show has really no end. Thank you for taking us through that. Final question, who won? We said who was in the semi-finals. Who was triumphant?
Sadly, everyone's least favourite, Bees.
The Bees, with Bradman leading the wicket. Who led the wickets? He led the runs?
The runs, Bradman comfortably. He 1,261 runs at 105. And
Stop it.
His teammate Boone was the only other four-figure batsman. He got 1,076 at 82. Yeah, like I say, not too many upsets. The bowling, I've arranged it is in averages that I do in Wisdom, but the leading wicket taker was Bishan Bedi again, so the Bees really, really dominated. But I mean, look, just cursory glance at the stats. Derek Underwood in a kind of flawed U team absolutely shone. He took 52 wickets, and obviously they only played the seven group game. And then podcasting world legend Aubrey Faulkner, who is a Jared Kimber who's really obsessed with him.
Yes,
right?
Jared wrote the definitive Aubrey Faulkner.
Yeah, well, Aubrey, he did the business. I mean, the S didn't do too well, but he's fifth in the batting averages with 604 at 67. And then he took, I can't find him, he's somewhere down the bottom, but he took like 40 wickets at about 28. So yeah, good old Aubrey.
Yeah, broadly in keeping with his actual real life career.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, isn't he the only Test cricketer in history to have a batting average over 40 and a bowling under 30?
Yeah, his overall figures are ridiculous, and was the sort of standard bearer for that team at the time that he was playing before he passed away. Rob, for coming on to the show and really embracing the spirit of the Final Word story time, thanks for sharing what you've been up to over the last couple of months.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's been a real thrill. Cheers.
I'm Glenn Maxwell. Make sure you listen to my favourite podcast, The Final Word.
Thanks again to Rob. That was fantastic. Really enjoyed his company, having a chat down the Zoom screen. We will put in the show notes his blog link. Rob said that he's been wanting to start a blog for a really long time, and this was the catalyst for that, the work that he's done. So he's called it his Alphabet Challenge, and you'll be able to pick it up and look at all the scorecards and all the spreadsheets there at the link I'll drop in now.
And obviously, for that ridiculous effort, Rob Kingston is our CBUS Super Performer of the Week. Much like his made-up batting characters, CBUS goes into bat for their members. You can visit cbussuper.com.au/The Final Word today if you've ever wanted to go to a superannuation website and see cartoons of us on the landing page. If that makes you feel better about addressing your super, then great, because that is a thing that we can do for you. That is a very specific service we can offer. You can get a PDS, which will help you decide if CBUS Super is right for you, and you can remember that past performance is not a reliable indicator of future performance.
Beautifully done, Geoff. Yes, I like the idea that someone making a massive financial decision about sorting their super ad is going to see a photo of you and me. Well, not even a photo, a caricature of you and me and go, this is the day I will do it. But it should be, because there's no point waiting. It's a good thing to get sorted out.
I just think it might be calming, because financial decisions are scary, even if they're not bad ones, like having some money when you retire. They're intimidating. People put them off for years and years and years. And so, maybe if there are a couple of friendly drawn faces by the very lovely artist David Squires, then maybe that makes you feel more like doing it.
All right, Geoff, after a long intro this week, we're finally into the meat and veg of our show. How do we do that?
Nerd Pledge. It is a game. It is a game that initially we started playing with people on our Patreon page because they were using this game to support the show by sending contributions to the show but not normal amounts of currency that they were sending, but very specific numbers, and the numbers had some link to cricket in some way, and we didn't know what the link was, but we had to work it out. That's how the game started, and that is how the game continues to be played as nerd pledges come in week after week, and we look at them on this show.
Well explained, Geoff. The first of those this week is a beauty, an absolute beauty. So 906 from Basab Majumdar. It comes with a clue. Basab says, a decade when modern Indian cricket was born. 906 is a mix of 5 numbers. As a collective, they refer to, let's say, a classical musical ensemble of some kind. And Indian cricket classics they are. Now, it's a cryptic clue, a lot of detail there, Geoff, but I know you spent quite a bit of time this week getting to the bottom of it.
906, Basab Majumdar. Yeah, when I saw this clue, I had a pretty good feeling immediately about what it would be. But it meant that I had to do a lot of research into this because it was very interesting. And so when I say I had to, I mean I just did. I kept putting off recording the show because I was like, I need another day to just keep reading about what's going on with this particular answer. So let me put the number together for you first. Okay. 906, combination of 5 numbers. We have 266 test wickets taken by Bishan Bedi, 242 for Bhagwath Chandrasekhar, 189 for Erapali Prasanna, 156 for Srinivas Venkataraghavan. Now, these 4 are the famous spin quartet that bowled for India through the 60s and 70s last century. And if we add up the total of all of their wickets, it still leaves us 53 short of the 906. So we need a 5th number in there. But if we add in Chandu Borde, who was an all-rounder of the same era and who played with each of those spinners in various teams, and who was also a spinner himself, an all-rounder who bowled leg spin, he took 52 wickets, not 53 wickets. So I think that I reckon Basab's done this by memory because, he has a great fondness for these numbers and has thought Chandu Borde took 53 wickets, actually 52. So the number should have been 905, but not, no criticism there. That's fine. You can do it by memory because I'm confident that that's close enough, that this is going to be correct.
Yeah.
Right. You happy with this so far?
I think I am. I note that the last time that you thought that somebody may have made a typographical error in their number,
it was me.
It was you. So I'll add that caveat, but I'm willing to go with it. Basab's been a dependable correspondent in recent times, so I'm sure he'll let us know if you've got it wrong, and we can come back to it next week. But let's work on the assumption that you have got it right, and go into a bit more depth, shall we, about the 5 men you've just referenced.
Well, yeah, there's no one else who would fit in as a 53. So and Borde fits perfectly as a 52. And one number off it, I think we're pretty confident. So right, we've got 4 spinners, and having 4 spinners around a test team is pretty fun just to begin with. And then you've got the variation, the different kinds of spinners. So Prasanna was an off spinner who played first in 1962, played a couple of matches and then didn't play again for about 5 years and came back into the team around the time that the others were all there as well. So he was a short off spinner who used lots of flight, and he's described as a spinner who owned the air above the pitch, the air above the batter's eye line. That belonged to Prasanna. So he threw the ball up there. Yeah, and he was a real thinker around the game, Prasanna. Gavin Robertson told us a fantastic story on the greatest season it was, mini-series we made around the India-Australia rivalry. When he was playing in India in 1998, Prasanna pulled him to one side of the dinner and said, "You're getting it all wrong. You're bowling too slowly in India. You need to bowl more quickly. Add to your run-up." And Gavin Robertson thought about this at the top of his run-up after taking some tap in the second test match and just added a couple of extra steps there and then. No coaching to it, just on the back of a conversation that he'd had with this former Indian spinner. And the rest is history. It went really well for him thereafter. I think it might have been the second innings of the first test match where he took wickets. Whatever it was a turning point for him as an Australian bowler on that tour because, Prasanna wasn't just a great bowler, but he thought about the game deeply. Yeah, so his whole thing was beat them in the air. The air belongs to me. I'm a spinner. That was his approach. Chandrasekhar was a leg spin bowler, And he's the one who, famously had his right arm damaged in childhood by a polio infection, and he managed to turn that into a virtue because his arm was thinner. He was able to really whip his arm through, and he added a lot of speed, more speed than you'd expect from a leg break bowler. So he could shred the ball through, and he could also throw it up and slow it down, and that gave him more variety and more ability to beat players on the back foot and get the ball through them before they expected it. So the thing I discovered that I enjoyed most about Chandrasekhar was that he said, I need a slip and I need 2 short legs. And aside from that, it doesn't matter where you put the rest of the fielders. His theory was if I'm bowling well, I'll get the wickets in those 3 positions. And if I'm bowling badly, it doesn't matter where they are, I'll be smashed. So, yeah, it was like, as long as I've got those 3, I'm all good.
Yeah, real contrast to all the debate we have around whether spinners should have a deep point or not. This is the very opposite. It's like, well, fuck it. You give me what I need, the rest don't matter.
Yep, the rest don't matter. Venkat was also an off-spinner like Prasanna, but very different type. He was a lot taller, generally faster through the air, more about using bounce and accuracy in that manner of the taller spinners that we see getting around, like Harbhajan Singh, I imagine, that kind of type. And then Bishan Bedi was the left-arm orthodox spinner. So he was the last to debut in 1966, but he would go on to be the most prolific and play the most test matches, captained India and took the most wickets. So he's described really nicely by Mike Brearley, who wrote in Wisden about Bedi, saying, more than with any other slow bowler, beautiful is the word that stays. Bedi was one of those athletes whose athleticism was expressed almost exclusively in what he did best. A few easy rhythmic steps, perfectly balanced, and he moved smoothly into the delivery stride. There was no sense of striving, nothing rushed or snatched, no hiccups, just an easy flow. This is a guy who once bowled 12 overs and conceded 6 runs in a one-day international.
Brilliant. And it's kind of a reminder as well that the way that spinners approach the crease was fundamentally different until the modern era. I remember talking to a bowling coach about this once with wrist spinners. He said that Shane Warne ruined it for everybody in a lot of ways, but not least with run-ups, because Warne was so strong through the shoulders and had such massive hands when he got to the crease that the ball just sat so nicely in. He didn't really need to bounce to the crease, and so many leg spinners have tried to replicate Warne, and they didn't have that power in that final step. Yep. They needed to actually run in or bounce in at the very least, and that's now de rigueur. You don't see many spinners really walk to the crease. Matt Parkinson, the England leggy that's playing at the moment, is probably the most like Warne, and he bowls quite slowly through the air. Whereas back then, you look at tapes of cricket series of yesteryear. I was watching I think I mentioned to you, Geoff, I watched a documentary about cricket in the 50s from England a couple of weeks ago, and that's exactly how spinners went about it. It was a walk to the crease, and it was all about what they did with their fingers at the last minute, and it was very slow through the air, and I suppose that was the joy and the beauty that Brearley's describing there.
Yeah, some of the the kind of Abdul Qadir run in at a crazy angle, or even Stuart McGill, who we were talking about before, who seemed to come in off a medium paces run up when you were used to watching Shane Warne. So those are the main 4: Prasanna, Chandrasekhar, Venkat, and Bedi. They're the 4 big guns, and they all came together under the Nawab of Pataudi,
Tiger.
Mark II. The younger, the Nawab of Pataudi II, the quickening, who was captaining India at the time.
I know I've said it before, but whenever we think of Tiger Pataudi, all I think about is the Billy Birmingham CD for Bill Laurie, This Is Your Life, when he's interviewed on the show and he goes, "Fuck you, fuck your country, and I hope you have a shit night." His parting words to Bill Laurie when brought on as a guest.
Well, maybe there was something in that, but the Nawab Mark II had no fast bowling, basically, and decided that rather than pick ordinary fast bowlers with a couple of good spinners, if your best bowlers are spinners, just pick them all. A bit like Clive Lloyd doing the opposite in the West Indies, saying, well, why bother picking a spinner who's not as good as a 4th fast bowler if we can have one? So this was the idea. They all came together in the squad when the West Indies toured India in 1966. And they all played in that series, but mixing and matching, so only 3 of them in the side at any one time. There's actually only one test match ever where they all 4 played in the same test side, and that was in 1967 in Manchester. They did really well. They took 19 wickets between them, bowled England out pretty cheaply twice, and didn't have the batting support, so they still lost the test match. And so after that, it tended to be Beatty, the left-arm orthodox, Chandra, the leg spinner, and then one of the two off-spinners, even though they were very different kinds of off-spinners. So in different groupings of three, they played a lot over the next decade. So they won away series in the West Indies and in England in 1971, which was massive for India. I mean, this was an Indian team that had won something like 3 tests out of the last 70 plus that they'd played. You know, they weren't used to winning matches. Chandrasekhar was a real match winner. Off the top of my head, I think it's 16 5-wicket hauls. 8 of them came in test match wins. So he played in 14 wins and took a 5 for in 8 of those wins. So, you know, was a real match-winning kind of player. And, you know, they won those away series. They won a stack of home series as well over that time. And also all 4 of them played on that amazing tour of Australia in 1977-78 when 5 test series, it was 2-2 heading into the 5th, and Australia managed to clinch the series late. But the Indian spinners had been so good throughout that series, Prasanna in particular. So those were the 4, and then alongside them, sort of at the start of their journey, I suppose at least, was Chandu Bordade, who was the all-rounder. So he'd debuted a bit earlier in the late 50s, but played through until 1969, and didn't overlap with the bowling a lot. He took the last of his wickets and bowled for the last time in 1965 because he'd wrecked his shoulder and couldn't really do it anymore. So, you know, he was pretty much done with bowling by the time the quartet got going, but he did have a key role in winning a series against England in 1962, which was the test match in which Prasanna had debuted. So there was that overlap with Bordade kind of handing on the baton, as it were, to the next generation of spinners and being able to stop bowling himself. So he was more a batting player, and he was famous at the time as India's best player of very fast bowling against the West Indies in particular. So those 5, combine them all, they get us to 905, which is close enough to 906 for me to say that is Basab Majumdar's number.
Good on you, Basab, and well done, Geoff. A great way to start the show with a nice story there about a wonderful era of Indian cricket. Our second set of new numbers, a double header. 286, Alasdair Townsend, who was integral in getting Roberto Moretti on the show a few weeks ago to talk about Brazilian cricket. Alasdair lives over there. And Sean McGivern, they've both sent through 286. Geoff, Alasdair comes with a clue. It reads as follows. First to the party in his own home. He wasn't the first player from his country to perform this feat. It had previously occurred in 1991, but my player did it in a rain-affected day in a game during the first half of the 2000s. So I think here he thought it was the first time it had happened, and he realised it actually happened in 1991. But nevertheless, that's the framework. It's a bit cryptic, and I don't think we've got too far on this, have we?
Well, I'd like to start this communion with Alasdair by saying that, you know, there are no endings, just beginnings, and that, you know, this is just the start of something. You know, this clue, this number, it can go on like Celine Dion's heart. But as an initial starting point, and, you know, we have to be frank about things, I spent quite a lot of time looking at cricket matches from 1991 and cricket matches from the early 2000s, and I still have no fucking idea what is going on as yet. NFI as opposed to NFT, non-fungible token. So maybe you can sell this clue for like $500,000 on something blockchain. Maybe. Look, we're going to continue with this. This is the point. But I wanted to initially steer it to the crowd to say, if you have you know, some sort of inkling what might be going on, you can throw us a hint, and obviously, you know, we'll return to it. But at the moment, I'm kind of stumped on this.
Yeah, and I think sometimes when we're stumped, we say we're going to come back to that next week, and we don't mention it on the show. Other times we say, we don't know the answer to this, the crowd can help us out. This is the latter. So the clue again, first to the party in his own home. He wasn't the first player from his country to perform the feat. It had previously happened in 1991, but the player in question did it in a rain-affected game in the first half of the noughties. Thank you, Alasdair. Next up, Sean McGivern, no clue, 286. You know what that means?
It means that I'm going to sing Metallica and put Sean McGivern in instead of Unforgiven. Is that what it means?
No, but better still, how about this? Yes, on the weekly show, Ellie Oldroyd told us how she interviewed Chesney Hawkes, and he returns again after a couple of weeks off. Hello, Chesney, Reading's favourite musician. The 286th Test cricketer from England is the man that... I love when a number like this comes up, Geoff. When I see a number in sort of anywhere between about 240 and about 300, I'm like, this is in my hitting zone. Please be a cricketer who's only played a handful of Test matches for England. And that was the case for a man by the name of Jim Sims. Jim Sims.
Now I know we've never looked at Jim Sims in detail, but I think he might have come up on the show before, just in passing, because I'm sure I remember having a conversation about how in Muriel's wedding, when Muriel pretends that she has a boyfriend, and she's asked what his name is, she says Tim, and then Rachel Griffith says, "What's his last name?" and she says Sims, and she goes, "His name is Tim Sims," and she's like, "Yes," and it's a very funny scene in the show. So Jim Sims actually existed. Real guy.
This will be a real test as to whether a friend of the show, Nick Tooby, is listening. He's our Muriel's wedding correspondent on The Final Word. So if he's listening,
right,
he'll doubtless respond with the WhatsApp. So Jim Sims was a tall wrist spinner who his main trick, he had lots of variety. He had a big nasty wrong-un, and that was enough to get him 4 Test matches between 1935 and 1937. That was in the middle of a long Middlesex career that spanned 1929 to 1952. So he played for 23 years there at Lords. His debut, so his first Test match was at Leeds in 1935. He only took 1 wicket, but pretty hard to get on given that Headley Verity was the main spinner, so understandable that he didn't get too much of a bite that week. He then took 7 wickets the next year when he got brought back into the team against India at the Oval, and it included his best bowling in Tests of 5 for 73. That was enough to get him on the plane to Australia in 1936-37. He played 2 Test matches, and the last of those, Geoff, was the Bradman Special, the Melbourne Test of early 1937, where, of course, Australia were 200 for 9 declared after England were all out for 120 or something like that on that famous sticky dog the rest day, and then Bradman goes bananas in the Australian second innings. Actually, it wasn't 130 odd. It was a second declaration, wasn't it? England declare it like 90 for 8 in order to get a second go at Australia, and they reverse the order, and Bradman comes in at number 7, and the rest is history, really. But yes, in that second innings, which ended up being
still the record score from number 7, isn't it?
Yeah,
that
yeah,
270.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, Sims took plenty of tap, but they all did really, as Bradman and Fingleton went to work. He actually got Fingleton out for 136, but Australia made 564, and that was kind of it for.
His name's Jim Sims. I mean, it's just it was like South Melbourne markets, like government soy sauce, you know.
The South Melbourne Jim Sim. It's like it's a bigger version, a bigger version of the Dim Sims, the Jim Sim, South Melbourne style. So that's the end of the Test career, but it didn't really matter, I don't think, too much to Jim. He was a friendly, happy-go-lucky character who was grateful to get the chance to play for England. Dennis Compton loved him, and he wrote the obituary when he passed away, which we'll come to in a sec. But Compton said that Sims referred to his wrong-un as the old wozzler. The old wozzler was
what?
The old wozzler. That's what he called his wrong-un. Isn't that good?
Look, I know that like sometimes a criticism you could level at this show is that sometimes we veer into dick jokes a bit too much. Umpires Richard Illingworth and Kettleborough being big dick and little dick and so forth. But come on, if someone says they're whipping out the old wozzler, there is only one thing that you think that means. Like, even if you've never heard the word before, which I had not until about 30 seconds ago, you don't think that means anything else. Oh, you think I should whip out the old wozzler? Or 6th over, time to get the old wozzler out. Oh, what? Oh, he's playing a bit loose outside the off stump. Time
to get the old
throw
wozzler
in the
out.
old wozzler. No.
I suppose. I mean, Nathan Lyon named his carom ball, whatever it was, Geoff, didn't he? All the way back when.
Yeah.
I can imagine John Embry might have called his wrong, or might have called his other one the old wozzler. But yes, so did Jim Sims.
Just to distract them while you're running into bowls, like Jason Gillespie doing the seagull arms. Just run in with the old wozzler out.
What's that Eric Banner album, Good for Football? No, it was called Out of Bounds, wasn't it? When Kent Butcher's on the mark for Collingwood, and Kent Butcher's got his cock out. Yes, Eric Bana did have a career in comedy in Australia before he became the actor that perhaps you know him as if you're listening from anywhere outside of Melbourne. Right, so more on Jim Sims.
When news breaks, Porter is where the action is. Sitting on the bonnet of a car outside 7-Eleven, eating a pineapple donut. We're in the bathwater here.
Yep. So, according to Dennis Compton, that is, my old friend Dennis, Jim Sims spoke out the side of his mouth, which became infectious in that Middlesex dressing room. So that's what he would do. He would talk out the side of his mouth, and all the players started doing it with him. He was such a rare and endearing character, Compton said in the conclusion of the obituary, which I thought was nice. 1,581 first-class wickets at 25. He took 100 wickets in a season 8 times. In 1939, he had 159 wickets at 20 when the season reached its premature conclusion. That was the most in the country, as, of course, that being the year the Second World War was declared. So he has that stretch out of the game. But after the war, he kept cracking on. So in 1948, he took all 10 wickets in an East versus West England game. Not many people have taken all 10, but Jim Sims did. He took 2 hat-tricks and one of those was against the touring South Africans at Lords in 1947. And how's this for a late twist? When his career ends, a little bit down the track, he decides that he wants to stay involved. So he becomes the Middlesex scorer. I mean, it's a fairly unlikely transition from being. We have a lot of dedicated scorers who listen to the final word, but I don't think any of them were playing first class cricket and have been former Test cricketers and then on the tools, on the pens and the rulers. During
Wozzler in or Wozzler out when he was doing the scorecards? What was the position of the old Wozzler? Just dip it in the inkwell and then mark the card with it.
Well, I don't know what the old Wozzler was doing in the hotel room in Canterbury in 1973, where he tragically had a heart attack the night before a county game and died at age 69. He was going to be scoring the next day. But yes, he was England player 286. He was dusty old bastard Jim Sims. Wozzler in, Wozzler out. He had that test cap, and obviously it's pretty clear he left a pretty big impression on the game. So I'm glad we were able to tell his story today.
Thanks, Jim. Pour a little soy sauce out on the curb for you. Great. Okay, we've got one more number. We've got one more new number. It's a double header. It's coming in from Tim Harding and Alex Brown, and the number is $3, 3.00. Now, this might ordinarily not be a nerd pledge. It might be a Julio pledge. And, the Julio pledges are those who, they're not interested in getting in the nerd business. They're just going to send a normal amount of currency. And I will say we have some Julios to thank as well, but I'll do that next week because I'd like to dedicate a little bit of time to the Julios when it's their time to shine. So if you have Julio'd in, the last couple of months and your name hasn't come up, that's when it will. But 3.00 in this case, in these two cases, we've been assured that it is a nerd pledge. It's a nerd pledge number. So it might mean 30, it might mean 300, it might mean 3, all kinds of things. But I think it's going to be the same answer for both players regardless, because I already know that Tim is a New Zealander because his previous number was relating to Richard Hadley's 9 wickets in an innings. And Alex is a raging Kiwi who has had a few goes at Nerd Pledge over the last couple of years, and they've all been New Zealand numbers. And Alex said, time to make it a bit harder, given that you already know it will be about New Zealand. So I know this is a New Zealand number, and I think it'll be the same number for both rather than different numbers. This is where I'm up to thus far.
Okay.
All that said, I've got no idea what the actual number is, but here are some things. I'm going to show my working. All right. So 300.
Old Wozzler in or old Wozzler out?
Old Wozzler tucked to the left, discreetly out of sight below the Zoom screen. Don't want any of those New York Times type incidents on the final word.
I'll drop a tube
now,
be doing that.
I'm going to invite baby John Burgess onto the show. Going to compose ourselves here. 300 is a famous New Zealand number in a way, by dint of never existing, because it is, as we've mentioned on the show before, the number the score that Martin Crowe never got. He got out for 299 and was haunted by it, by his own admission, for far longer than was healthy. It was something that really caused him a lot of grief in his life, that he had wanted to get that triple century and never did. And so when Brendan McCullum became the first New Zealander to score a triple century, it was quite a cathartic moment for a lot of New Zealand supporters who, felt the angst that Martin Crowe had felt. So 300 was important in that sense. There have been 3 New Zealand bowlers to take 300 test wickets, in Richard Hadley, Daniel Vettori and Tim Southey. Hadley is one of very few players, there are 7 all up, who took 300 wickets and scored 3,000 runs. He was out of the the big 4 all-rounders through the 1980s. He got 300 wickets before Imran Khan and Kapil Dev, but he got his 3,000th run after those 2 and after Ian Botham. So I don't think it's going to be that, because that's not quite significant enough. Wally Hammond, when batting against New Zealand, went from 200 to 300 in 47 minutes. It might be one of interest to you, Adam, when he scored a triple there.
Fuck. Really going for it.
Now, if it were not 300 but 30, maybe the incredible belting World Cup match in 2015 between Australia and New Zealand in Auckland, the key partnership for Australia in the first innings was when Brad Haddon and Pat Cummins put on 45, and Cummins made 7 runs but faced 30 balls, and that was the partnership that set up that match, got Australia to 150 odd, which New Zealand ended up getting their 9 wickets down. So, maybe that's pretty obscure, but I doubt it. New Zealand made exactly 300 in one-day internationals twice, both times in wins against India. One of those was last summer. The other one was quite interesting because it was in 1999 when a sports betting enthusiast, Chris Cairns, made 115 off 80 balls, made the best part of 121 off the last 10 overs in that game. He was a hell of a player when he was in full flight, Chris Cairns. So even though he got out in the 49th over, they still made 121 off the last 10. Javagal Srinath took 3 wickets and batted at number 6 for India, because I think Tendulkar was injured. Javagal Srinath batted at number 6. Yeah, I mean...
Did you see the commercial that he did this week? I'm not sure if it was the commercial he was in, but Jared Kimber... Is it an IPL ad they were using this year? Perhaps it was, but it's worth looking up on Jared's
It's for a credit card company with Javagal Srinath and Venkatesh Prasad leading a sort of boy band style crooning exercise. It's quite good. Good to see Venki getting some love out there. But yeah, Srinath at 6 wouldn't have happened very often. Chris Harris took 4 for. Mohammed Azharuddin was playing. He and Chris Cairns could have had some interesting conversations. Tell you what, maybe Arthur Conningham could have gotten involved, shared a few ideas. But I don't think it's that. But then the last thing I've got that might actually be something is that in 1982, New Zealand beat Australia in a test match in Auckland, and they were 4 or 5 wickets down. New Zealand chasing a small total in the 4th innings. They needed 104. Richard Hadley came out at the fall of the 5th wicket, and after seeing out 1 ball, he smacked the second ball for 6 to win the game, meaning that he finished the innings with a strike rate of exactly 300. And I think he hit the 6 off Bruce Yardley, the spinner, as best I can tell. But maybe that Richard Hadley strike rate of 300 might be the one that Tim Harding and Alex Brown are going for.
Whew, you've gone deep this week, Geoff. Between what you did for 906 and what you've done for 300, you've been a busy boy. Thank you to Tim. Thank you to Alex. Thank you to all of our new pledges and everybody who's signed up in the last couple of weeks. For whatever reason, the start of a new month tends to generate quite a bit of activity. So great to have all the new people on board. If you want to be part of Patron Nerd Pledge, if you want to be part of really supporting the show, enabling us to make this a couple of times a week, do so by visiting patreon.com/the final word. It's fairly straightforward there in terms of issuing a Nerd Pledge. We love making this show. It's the best thing we do all week, and it's the lifeblood of the final word. So jump on if you're on the fence, if you're thinking about it one way or the other. You can hit the link in the show notes at the moment, and you get sent straight to the page, and from there you can be part of what we do here. Geoff, should we take a breather before moving on for some revisits and some confirmations and all the rest?
I'm with you, Captain.
Let's do it.
Hi, my name's Kate Cross, and you're listening to The Final Word with Adam and Geoff.
Geoff, we love working with the Lord's Taverners, and we love being responsible for good people doing good things. And that is the case with Declan Lawler, who is a patron of ours who's decided to run the length of the Thames Path, 185 miles of it across 4 days in July, which is quite a remarkable thing. Last week we talked about this and said that we should try and put our shoulder to the wheel and helping with that fundraising effort between now and July. And then for whatever reason, the link didn't come up properly in the show notes, and that wasn't ideal. We've rectified that. So in both last week's show notes and indeed this one as well, you can see his funding page. And I just think that's a lovely idea that he's heard us talking about the tabs over the last year or so and thought, how can I play my part in a year where it is still incredibly difficult to fundraise over here for obvious reasons in terms of mass gatherings and all the rest of it. So he's deciding to do an individual challenge, and hopefully we'll raise plenty of money for the important work the Lord's Tabs do along the way.
I don't think if you added up all of the running that I've done in my entire life, trying to catch a tram or like run, really late for something, whatever, I don't think it would equal 185 miles in toto. Declan's going to do this in 4 days. For no reason except to raise some money for other people. What a maniac. Good kind of maniac. But I love that Declan listened to the show and said, yeah, all right, I'm gonna. It's not like anyone pitched this to him. He's just done it, off his own bat, as it were. And now people might be able to benefit from the work he's going to do. So that's great.
It's the equivalent of running 4 ultra marathons in the space of 4 days. I mean, an ultra marathon, it's about 50 mile, I think, from memory. So he's nearly running 4 ultra marathons in I mean, that is a punish, which means that there's a second part to this, Geoff. He wants to find someone, or he's open to running with lots of people, of course, why wouldn't he be? But he asked whether I can do some of the last leg with him. Not 50 mile, but some of the last leg with him. Unfortunately, I'm working on the 12th of July on a first-class game and won't be able to get to London with him to see it through. But I think this could be quite nice.
You must be shattered. You must be really devastated.
Well, I have been running my 4 kilometre loop around here on most mornings, not when I'm feeling a bit poorly as I am today. But so I think I'm up for sort of 5Ks or something like that. But if not 50 or not 50 mile, which is a lot more than 50Ks. But I think it could be quite nice maybe if Final Word community members want to join Declan for part of this mission. It's going from the 8th till the 12th of July, I think it is, something like that. So we can publish more information in the show notes along with the fundraising link. But if this is your thing, why not get involved as well?
You can join him on the final leg on the 12th. I suppose you could join him for more if you were really keen. But the final leg is the one where it would be nicest to have some people running into the rapturous reception, or maybe a few people to greet him at the end. I'm not sure exactly where the end of the path is. But what this can do is raise money for young people in the UK and elsewhere, particularly young people who are living with disability or who are in disadvantaged situations. They're the kids that Lord's Taverners try to help with their cricket programs and other programs to basically try to cut down on the amount of isolation and loneliness that kids in these situations feel. They give them a social place to be, help them build skills in socialising and reduce their anxieties around it, and give them an opportunity to make friends and have a place to be part of something, a broader community. It's an important suite of work that Lord's Tavs do, and these kind of fundraising efforts are essential to them. Yeah,
and have been doing so for 7 decades. They're a remarkable charity. They play such a big role in so many parts of the game, over here in the UK especially, but around the world as well. So this year, in the absence of those major fundraising events, they're encouraging people to get involved individually. So we spent a lot of time discussing that the equivalent of 1 cup of coffee per month can fund 1 kid being in a program for a whole year, which is pretty cool. But if you can kind of up the ante this year, for example, they're encouraging people in this communal effort to scale the Yorkshire Three Peaks, or do the Glencoe to Ben Nevis Challenge, or do the Deep to Peak Challenge. There's a number of these on the Lord's Tabs website at the moment, which will pop also in the show notes. So if you're inspired by what Declan's doing or inspired by the work of the Lord's Taverners, it's all there. Visit lordstaverners.org, and if you can throw a few bob Declan's way, I want to run with him on the 12th of July, that'd be brilliant as well. The Final Word in proud association with Lord's Taverners.
Hi, I'm Isha Gua, and you're listening to The Final Word with Adam Collins and Geoff Lemon.
Final word story time. Adam Collins, Geoff Lemon. Our first revisit this week, Geoff. So these are the numbers, if you're new to the show, that we have got wrong and we return to try and get right. Sam Lister sent through 201. Last week we talked about the other Jack Russell and the 201 he made for the MCC against South Australia in 1921 at Adelaide Oval. The clue was that it related to 201 and a tour game. And Sam said he loved the story, but we weren't quite right.
No, enjoyed hearing about the other Jack Russell, said Sam. The kind of story my wonderful late pop would have loved. But my 201 was actually a team score. Your sleuthing, Adam, he says, is on the right track in terms of roughly working out his age, therefore his grandfather's likely age, therefore the approximate time frame. But he lets on that the match took place during an English tour to Australia and says there is a connection my pop had to this game that I'm pretty sure neither of your grandfathers would have.
Yeah, and he's right. A very strong connection at that. So, yeah, he's from good Queensland stock and he's 36 years of age. So, and I think the other clue was that his grandfather wasn't quite old enough to be there. In any case, it all roads lead back to Bodyline and 1932-33, a very famous tour of Australia for England, perhaps the most famous. The Gabba Tour game.
Perhaps the most famous, definitely the most.
Definitely the most famous. Yeah. Sure, of course it is. Yeah. Why am I putting a caveat around it? The most famous tour that's ever been.
Arguably, my least favourite word in all sport reporting is arguably, and particularly when they say arguably one of the finest batsmen to have played. If you're saying one of, you don't need to say arguably. Piss off with your equivocation. If you're one of, you're already covered. No, you can argue anything. Arguably, COVID is spread by 5G. It's arguable. It's fucking stupid and it's wrong.
All right.
But it's arguable. You don't need to put arguably in there.
All right. Got it. Let's go. Let's go full wozzler here. The most important, significant,
thank you,
memorable tour that England ever made of Australia. Mm-hmm. Controversial, probably the best descriptor there.
Yep.
There was a tour game at the Gabba in Queensland, of course, which is where Sam is from, where the MCC played just before the Brisbane Test match. So this is in February 1933, just after the Adelaide Test, which was earlier in January, where there was the Oldfield incident where the crowd erupted and they weren't protesting, but the deafening boos that you read about from that particular controversial Test match. And looking closely at the scorecard of this tour game, Geoff, who batted number 5 for Queensland? None other than Lewis Lister. And he went on to top score as well. Against Larwood and Vos and Bose and co. He made 67 out of Queensland's 201 in the first innings, which is pretty cool. It was one of, and I assume Lewis Lister must be the grandfather of Sam. It stands to reason. Great grandfather. You're right. Yes, that's better. So we're working. Yeah, the generations would be such that even though his grandfather may not have been born, his great grandfather looks to be Lewis Lister, who made that top score in the innings of 201. Yeah, one of 3 half centuries he made for Queensland as a right-handed batsman starting in 1927. He also played the MCC in 1928 where he made 59, another one of his 50s. And that was at the exhibition ground, Geoff. So, of course, we've recorded the show from the exhibition ground before, which was where Bradman debuted in that summer of 1928-29. In 1933, though, he was out to Bill Bowes in that first innings and Headley Verity in the second, so a couple of very handy names there. In the Cricketers' match report, which I tracked down, it said that Lister hit well, but could get nobody to stay with him. There was a curious incident during the innings. Oxenham hit the ball to Allen's hands at short leg off Larwood, but on appeal, the umpire gave him not out, as he stated that he was unsighted. The other umpire did not give a decision. So there was a catch at short leg straight off the bat, and because the umpire couldn't see, presumably because the bowler was in the follow-through, that was enough to have the decision turned down. I doubt we see that in modern cricket. But yes, it was his great-granddad who stood up to Harold Larwood and co. and made 67 out of 201. We're assuming great-granddad. It could be his great-uncle or something like that. I'm sure he'll let us know. But it's brilliant all the same. So that's the revisit. 201. Sam Lister, thank you.
It's got to be great-granddad because his grandfather had a connection to it, meaning that it must have been his father. That's much cooler than – I think my great-grandfather tried to join up in the Boer War and then ended up in jail for fraud. So – or maybe stealing. Yeah. There's a much cooler great-grandfather story. You know,
my great-grandfather wasn't my great-grandfather. I'm pretty sure the story goes that my great-grandfather was off at the war when his wife fell pregnant with my grandfather, which means he couldn't have been there at the time. His brother was involved in all that. So that's all.
Interesting.
There's some family history for you.
Judicious use of the old wozzler.
Yes.
Okay. I like it. I like where it's gone. It's the umpiring thing does sort of ring true of the era, that it was probably a couple of local Queensland umpires. You know, they were like, "Oh, sorry, mate, didn't see it. Yeah, too bad." Yeah, there were lots of shenanigans going on. You know, the same kind of thing happening when they were no-balling Jack Marsh out of the game and so on in the early part of the century.
Queenslander!
Was that addressed to me? As a Queenslander, I can only assume that was addressed to me. Right. Next number, next revisit, Anna Collins, £5.66. You were talking about the innings in which Bradman made 334 at Leeds in 1930. God, there's been so much Bradman this show.
Yeah, well, she loved it. It was a beauty. And remember, of course, that we were doing 566 a second time after going down the wrong route. I think we sold 455 for her accidentally.
Well, I put in the wrong number, but someone solved this as well because the number I tried to put in was 566 and what I put in was 455. What a correspondent has pointed out is that obviously 4 is next to 5 and 5 is next to 6 on the keyboard. So if your fingers were one key wrong when you tried to do 566, you'd end up writing 455 by mistake, and that must be how it happened.
Oh, this is like that autocorrect with aunt. Well, not really with aunt. I see what's happened here.
Yeah.
I've seen what's happened here. Okay, so Anna goes on to give us another clue, and her nerd pledge was inspired by the fact that England were back on free-to-air television. So she made the pledge when England, presumably, were playing against India back in February. Some clues are much more obvious when you're watching cricket rather than listening to radio coverage. If you want a clue, the main street of America might help lead you to your answer. So I'm thinking Route 66, Joe Root. Mm-hmm. Where's number 66? Isn't that funny? Hey, Route 66, Route 66.
Hey. Well, also that they changed the number of the bus in Leeds that goes to Headingley. It's the number 66. Dead set. So that it's now Route 66 when you head down to Leeds.
I don't mind that. I heard Joe Root speaking about county cricket the other day on the BBC Test Match Special podcast, and he's a man who really loves his cricket. He's so passionate about it from start to finish, from the top of the pyramid to the bottom and all the rest. So we all love Joe Root. So I was looking for 566 and Joe Root links and didn't really get very far, really. At one stage, England led by 566 against Australia at Lords in 2013 when Root was on 178. He went on to make 180, though, the next day, so that doesn't really work. He averaged 5.66 in youth T20s for England way back when as well. And I looked at those double tons that he was making around the start of the year that Anna may have watched, and they didn't quite last 566 minutes. The one at Chennai was 536 minutes, so half an hour short. So that wasn't quite to be, but that was enough to get you in the right headspace for it.
Yeah, well, the 66 had to be Joe Root. The clue about some things being more obvious when you watch it on TV, it obviously is that you can see the player's shirt number, which you can't hear on the radio. But I figured, what's something that Joe Root has done 5 times, and something that he did for the 5th time during the first test of that series, the first test back on free-to-air in 15 years in England, was make a double century. That was his 5th double 100. So there was the unbeaten 200 against Sri Lanka at Lords in 2014. With that innings, he was the youngest England player since David Gower to make a 200. The great 254 that he made against Pakistan at Old Trafford, the 226 at Hamilton, and then in 3 test matches earlier this year, he made 228 at Gaul and then 218 at Chennai. So that was his 5th double 100. It was 5 double hundreds for number 66, Joe Root for Anna Collins.
That'll be the one, I reckon. Next revisit, Joseph Brookshaw, 1887. And I'm kind of gutted we didn't get this right. This might be some of our best work in recent times, making 1887 work for Simon Jones. The background was that Joseph's previous number related to Stephen Harmison's best test figures, and we thought, well, it's going to have to be Simon Jones, who played 18 test matches, and there was something else to do with the 87.
He took 18 wickets in the 05 Ashes, winning the Ashes for the first time since 1987.
That's right. That's right. And I think there was something else for 87 we liked as well. Either way, it was a bloody good answer, but not good enough. Joseph goes on to say that he had three favourite bowlers in the mid-2000s. So Harmison and Jones were definitely two of those, and he loved that we were able to link it through the 2005 Ashes with his number. But there was a third who didn't play for England, but was just too good for me not to love. He's actually been in the news in the past week as he's taking a break from cricket. So maybe my last clue wasn't quite right. So his last clue was that this particular person was still involved in cricket, and I like the idea that Simon Jones had last year taken up a position looking at insurance for cricketers' injuries. He finishes by saying, coincidentally, my first pledge of 619 also works for him. And that didn't take me long to realise he must be talking about Shane Bond, who played 18 test matches and took 87 wickets. What a bowler. Averaged just 22, and Geoff, as you know, his strike rate of 38 is the best it's the second best of all time behind George Lohmann. So that's the first, I suppose, first of the 20th or 21st century to have a strike rate that low, which is fairly remarkable when you consider how many wonderful bowlers have been through the test arena. I suppose he was, Geoff, thought of as the best seamer since Richard Hadley for a long time. Do you reckon Trent Bolt's overtaken him on that measure in the last few years? I don't know. It's a bit of a toss of the coin, isn't it?
Probably by body of work. Shane Bond is he's still more about potential than deliverance, because he, not deliverance in the banjo playing way, delivering. I don't know. It was all about what could have been with Shane Bond, because he was so good when he could get on the park, but he couldn't get on the park that often. And so, he was the most talented. I think that would still stand. But in terms of what Bolt's been able to do over, a decade plus in the game, would stand superior to that now. So,
and there was some amazing days. So the 619 was a one-day international that he played against India in 2005, but that's after 2 years away from the game, which makes it even more impressive, I reckon. That was when I think he had his back fused together, the same operation that was ultimately recommended to James Pattinson in Christchurch a couple of years ago. So the 2003 World Cup, remember he picked up 6 for 23 against Australia in a losing effort. He bowled a ball in that tournament against India that was clocked at 156.4 kilometres an hour. So, in a way, not surprising that stress fractures immediately followed that tournament, because he was sending it down so quickly. But he did step up against Australia. He took 44 one-day wickets against their main rival at 15.8, including a hat-trick at Hobart in 2006, 2007. He averaged just 19 in home test matches, including 8 wickets to finish his career in 2009. That was the only test match he played after briefly having a contract with the Indian Cricket League, which of course made it tough to segue back into the international arena, but he was able to do that at the very end. And noting the fact that he was in the news in the last couple of weeks, he just finished up with the Sydney Thunder as their coach, and he's announced that he's going to be taking some time away. But yes, per Joseph's commentary above, one of the most exciting bowlers to step on the field in that era, one of the quickest and certainly one of the most talented. Shane Bond, 18 test matches for 87 wickets.
Very good. I like it. And another one which you should have got right morally, Joe Reinhardt's $4.25, which had to be the 4 for 25 that Mark Higgs took in a tour game.
I was so excited about that. I thought this was so, his best figures, the mentorship of Lyon, the Canberra Comets, the Berendorf thing, it was all kind of there.
Mm-hmm. It was, so much of it was there. But Joe has said, enjoyed it, liked hearing about Canberra more, should talk about Canberra more, something that no one's ever said to Adam Collins before. Please talk about Canberra more. Haven't heard much about Canberra from you lately. What do you think? Is it a good town? Do you like it? This guy will talk to you about Canberra for 14 hours straight. Careful what you wish for, Joe. Now, Joe says the pledge relates to cricket in Canberra between last summer's touring team, so between India and the PM's 11.
Yes.
Linking back to oversized shorts, dirty polos, and all of the rest of it. The PM's 11. It's a fond place in our hearts. So something else in a PM's 11 game. What's 425?
Yeah, I was racking my brains for last year's tourists and the PM's 11. Of course, there was no PM's fixture, so that didn't quite add up. But yes, last year's tourists, being the Indians, did play in a very famous Prime Minister's 11 game back in December of 1999. And it was the very final push that Brett Lee made to get himself in the Test team. So he led the attack and took 4 for 25, thus 425. And that was after the PM's team made 334. Andrew Simons made 100. David Fitzgerald also made a ton. And then his brother Shane Lee was captain and threw him the ball to bowl the first over. Blocker Wilson was opening with him, but Lee just went nuts. He bowled so quickly in that game. I think it was on Optus Vision, I reckon. So we were able to see how quick he was because Brad Haddon was standing so far back, and he found the outside edge of VVS and Sachin quite early on to the gloves of Haddon, and he skittled Ramesh early on too, and I think he knocked the middle stump out of the ground. He hit the stumps again at the end. It was also very exciting. India were all out for 170, and yeah, he'd made that statement, and sure enough, he was picked for Boxing Day and took a 5-for on debut, and the rest is history.
Indeed. That's the end of the revisit section and the start of Brett Lee's many, many phantom chainsaws. If we haven't got your number right in the first section, we'll do it on the revisits. Drop us a message, let us know, particularly the ones where we definitely didn't get it right because we already knew that we weren't going to. But sometimes we do get them right. Confirmations, some of the ones we did get.
Yeah, we have a few here this week. One from Simon Butcher in his 304. We talked about Stephen Finn's Test bowling average of 30.4. Geoff nailed it. Poor old Finney's not had much luck with his knees. Of course, it was in relation to his knee hitting the stumps and that law change or that playing condition change that was made shortly thereafter. He's someone who I always wanted to do well, especially after being labelled unselectable by Ashley Giles back in 2013, I think that was. Maybe it was around the 2015 World Cup. Whatever it was, yes, I remember that. And it was a chastening experience for him. How could it not be? But the good news is that Finney was picked for Middlesex last week for his second game of the season and took 5 for 77. So he's taken a 4-wicket haul and a 5-wicket haul in his 2 matches so far that he's played. And I'm not sure whether he'll play this week. And, spoiler, we're recording this midweek because I'll be working at Lord's over the weekend. But yes, he's had his first opportunity with the red ball in a couple of years and he's taken it so far.
Do we try to have it both ways? Because we complain about officials being boring and not saying anything and giving pat answers and all the rest of it and not being honest. If a player's bowling so badly that they can't be selected and you say that they can't be selected, then, that's something that has been brought up a lot relating to Steve Finn over the years since that this was a painful thing and something for Can you criticise Ashley Giles for being straight about how it was at the time? I don't know. Yeah,
I suppose it's knowing your bowlers, knowing your players. I mean, yeah, it's an above the shoulder thing. I mean, that might work for some guys, for some players saying, "Oh, they're unselectable," that might fire them up. But I think we learnt quite a bit a couple of years ago watching the Edge documentary about his personality and what had happened to him in Australia in the previous tour when he was left out on Boxing Day. And yeah, I think in hindsight that was something that worked against Finn rather than motivating him to get back into the team.
Right. Well, the 304 was correct. Cam Again's 723 was also correct in that it was the 7 for 23 that Dennis Lilly took on his most dominant day in World Series cricket against the West Indies. World Series cricket still not as good as the gentlemen of Philadelphia versus the gentlemen of wherever else it was that they were playing against.
The smoking gentlemen of New York or whatever it was. The last
smokers and non-smokers. And
the last one we did get right was from Sam Nemser, albeit with a little bit of help, I must admit. This was my favourite bit of story time last week where Sam said that the 6, the 0 and the 9 all meant different things. And we knew there'd be a Kent connection. And it was to do with Joe Denley. Has 6 half-centuries, 0 centuries. I said 9 years between England caps for Denners.
Another great answer, mind you. This is 3 absolute ball-tearing answers that have been knocked back. Starting to feel a little bit aggrieved by just humorous, just light it. Just tell us what we want to hear.
Maybe so, but in a way, I'm glad that Sam did correct the record because he goes, amazing, so close to get 2 of the 3 bang on. But the third one wasn't the number of years, it's something else relating to Denley that you mentioned. 9 dentries. Remember the dentry? It was the cow and ton reimagined. So 9 times he faced 100 balls in a test innings. I think Vish and Will were the two who started that, and Rory Dollard and Charlie Reynolds as well, who were the Denley guys, and that was the catalyst for the Denley meme team, who I'm actually writing an essay about for the next edition of the Night Watchman. So that's a bit of haven't quite got my teeth into it yet, but that's something I'll be doing in the next couple of months when I've got
haven't got your dentures into it.
So 9 dentries. So thank you, Sam, for your 609. We finish as always with correspondence. Geoff, the first of those came from Chris Arkle.
Yes, Chris Arkle, obviously named after Derek Randall's nickname. A final bit on Thomas Hearn, a player from 1868 who we've spent a lot of time on over the last few weeks after our listener Thomas Amelia had Cricket Archive change their scorecard that showed Thomas Hearn opening the batting, even though he hadn't apparently done so. Chris says, wonderful that Cricket Archive was updated. One final thing. His grandson, Thomas John Hearn, played 1 match for Middlesex. He was called in late to take part in a game against the Gentlemen of Philadelphia at Lord's in 1908.
Thought you'd like that.
As a replacement for his cousin, J.T. Hearn. So the Gentlemen of Philadelphia, no doubt this was a first-class fixture, better than World Series cricket, as they rocked up at Lord's to play Middlesex. J.T. Hearn, a proper player who played 12 Test matches for England and took 3,000 first-class wickets, wasn't there, and so
picked his cousin
Jay Hearn had to come in and play instead. However, the game was played on a treacherous pitch, says Chris, and finished in a day. Hearn, arriving in the late afternoon, never took the field, so he's credited with a single first-class cap for a match in which he not only didn't play, but wasn't there for any of the match because he was the late replacement for someone else who was obviously a far better cricketer than him.
As soon as I saw that, I knew you were going to love it. It ticked a lot of boxes for you, didn't it? Status, the Gents of Philadelphia, and a relative of Thomas Hearn. So thank you, Chris Arkle, two relatives.
The grandson and the grandson's cousin. And I hadn't actually read that, but I can tell why you said, you should take the first bit of correspondence. You do that one, because there was a little Easter egg in there for me.
Yes, there was. A couple. And Chris Arkle, thank you for allowing us to put a really nice full stop on that conversation that's been going for about 4 weeks now. The second bit of correspondence is from Alan Simpson. And this is the hit me with your best shot Pat Benatar segment that we started last week. Mm-hmm. Who sent it? Jack Quigley wanted to know what we thought was the best shot we've ever seen in our lives. And Alan Simpson enjoyed that. And he also enjoyed the fact that, to his knowledge, Geoff is the first cricket podcaster to utter the immortal line, "Can we just come back to venereal disease for a second?" When last week talking about Wally Hammond's troubles in the mid-20s. Regarding the best cricket shot of all time, Alan goes on to say, "I would like to nominate Albert Trott's lofted straight drive, one of them in particular, of course, the one that goes over the pavilion at Lord's that we've talked about on Storytime in the past. Mm-hmm. Although, if the qualification is that you have to have actually been at the ground to have seen the shot, I may need to get Darren Stevens to nominate it for me. He was on the Lord's ground staff then, I believe."
Hey, still got.
I like it.
Very nice. Thank you, Ellen. I think that is a good nomination for, if you wanted to talk about most famous shots, maybe that's the most famous cricket shot, hitting it over the Lord's Pavilion. No one's done it since. It's a big swing. It was a big boy. And the last bit of correspondence from Ross Davey, who spotted the potential symmetry between the Dare to Dream tour and the Centenary Test, namely that we could try to lose a match against Dara Ismail Khan or against another team playing as Dara Ismail Khan by the same margin that Dara Ismail Khan lost in 1960, whatever it was, 50, whatever it was.
1964, I think it was.
64 by an innings and 800. So Ross Davey remembered the Centenary Test and the fact that the margin was the same as the margin of the Test match 100 years earlier. Ross was not at the first Test match in 1877, but was at the one in 1977. He says, I went to 3 days of that test as an 18-year-old uni student. Tony Gregg getting bowled by Max Walker, just about the loudest roar I have ever heard at the G, and I've been at plenty of grand finals. I also remember at lunch on the second day, a few of the old-timers strolled out to the centre wicket. Bradman grabbed a stump and rehearsed an off drive. I think Bill Vose was there, but I'm not sure about Larwood. It was 44 years ago. Very nice.
And he's right, Bill Vose. Not only did Bill Vose walk out there, he marked his run up out at the members' end. It's a lovely bit of footage that you can look up on YouTube where they take the players out, because of course all of them were flown out there, and Bill Vose, still he was a character. So he marked up his run at the MCG one final time in March 1977, and that is the final part of Storytime this week, Geoff. We're done.
It's
finished.
That's
it's all
the
over.
show.
It's been a fun show. Thank you to, I suppose, mostly Jim Sims and the old wozzler. That was a real highlight for mine, not one we'll forget in a hurry. And to everybody else that gave us a chance to tell a story, if you want to give us the chance to tell a story, do so by visiting patreon.com/the final word. You don't need to issue an elaborate clue. You can issue an easy clue and let us tell a story for you. That's fine. You don't have, it's not.
You can issue no clue.
It's not exactly
you can just
no
put
clue.
a number in.
It's not a contest. The point is, it's not a contest. It doesn't get, the show doesn't get any better for us having to interrogate what it might be for 3 or 4 hours. If anything, it means that we have less time to tell the story. So let that be a prompt. But no, it's been lovely having so many people getting on board recently, and as they have through the last 13 or 14 months. So patreon.com/the final word. Thank you to the Lord's Taverners and Declan Lawler for the work they're doing at the moment, raising that important money. Thank you to Seabus Superannuation. Visit cbussuper.com.au/the final word to sort out your super. Thank you to everybody who reviews and rates the show, to the team at Bad Producer Productions Network, and Dave Collins especially, who edits our show twice a week. Thank you, Geoff, for the work and research you put into making sure Storytime flows as nicely as it does each Saturday. And I think that's everybody.
Arigato, Mr. Roboto. We will see you for the weekly show on Wednesday.
You know what I meant here. I had to go about it